and Jesse would tightly close his eyes as the tears fall into the sand, and he yells, "Mr. White, just do it!" And before Tuco gets to one, Walter says with watery eyes, "I'm sorry, Jesse."
What brings you to this business? As he exhales a puff of smoke. Jesse and Walter look at each other with pained looks as Walter turns towards Hector and says, "My family. I have cancer and not a lot of time to make what I need so they can be alright," he says to Hector. And Hector takes another puff of his cigar and says in a relaxed tone, "Cancer? No issue. We have best doctor in all of Mexico. You can cook for us, make a lot of money for your family, and guess what? No cancer. Sound good?" He said... He says, laughing at his own joke. Walter cracks a fake smile and begins to ask Hector something, but is immediately cut off by Hector directing his attention towards Jesse. "What about you? What brings you to this business?" Jesse sits up and clears his throat and says, I'm good, Joe. I'm good with, also cooking the crystal." And Hector looks at Jesse with this annoyed and confused expression, like he doesn't really understand what he's saying, but he doesn't like it. And then he glances at Walter for a moment, then asks, "So who's better cook?" And at that moment, Jesse can see Tuco casually loading his gun in the kitchen, and his heart begins to beat faster and faster by the second, not even knowing what to say at this time. And Walter breaks the silence by saying, "We both are. I can't cook without him, and he can't do it without me. We're a team." As Walter looks at Jesse with a reassuring look, and Hector says to Walter in a slightly different but still direct tone, "So is he your family?" As he takes another puff of his cigar. And as Walter faces Hector and begins to explain his partnership with Jesse, he's once again cut off, but this time it's by a gunshot, and Walter's face is misted with Jesse's blood, similar to the Gus flashback when Hector killed Max, but in this case it's Tuco holding a gun with a sadistic smile. And as Jesse's lifeless body falls to the floor, Walter is in disbelief and even partially deaf by being that close to a gunshot, and he watches as blood pours out of Jesse's head onto the floor, with Tuco saying in a serious tone, "Your boy failed my lie detector, Heisenberg. He would have snitched on us if he had the chance. Trust me." Hector, who's unfazed by what just happened, asks Walter in the same direct tone, "Can you still cook?"
And as they pull up, Walter asks, "Is that him?" And Saul just says with taking a deep breath, "Yep, that's him." And when they exit the vehicle, they all start walking towards him. Mike would position himself at the back of the group with Saul leading Walter and Jesse to meet Lalo. "Heisenberg, Jesse, this is Lalo." And one by one, they would shake hands with Lalo. "So you are the great Heisenberg. Wow, it's so nice to officially meet you, the man who's been making me so much money," Lalo says, smiling in a friendly tone as he continues saying, "So how are you?" And this introduction catches Walter off guard, as he was expecting someone a bit more serious, and he's having a hard time reading Lalo. And Walter responds somewhat nervously saying, I'm good. Thank you, I'm good." "And how about you?" Lalo says, directing his attention towards Jesse. "Me? Yeah. Good to meet you, man. I'm glad you like the product." "Of course. People can't get enough of it. So how about we talk business?" And without any warning or reason, Lalo point blank shoots and kills Jesse right there on the spot, shocking everyone there at what they just witnessed. And Mike and Saul give each other a look, basically saying, that was not a part of the plan. Lalo, now with the gun pointed at Walter, talks in a more serious tone, saying, "So, like I said, let's talk business." And Walter, still distraught by Jesse's sudden death, would fall to his knees crying. And Lalo, who doesn't even understand what the big deal is, would casually tell Mike to help Walter up. And once he's back on his feet, Lalo would explain, "If you want to know why he's dead and you're not, just know that we Salamancas believe in blood for blood. And unlike him, I know who you are, Walter White." And all this news at once just leaves Walter speechless, because he had no idea that he was doing business with another Salamanca. And what makes it worse is that Saul and Mike knew who he was and they still brought them together. And Lalo continues, "So I'm thinking you come cook for the cartel maybe 2 weeks out of every month. 50-50 work-life balance. What do you say? I'm sure your family would appreciate it." And Walter, still with a million emotions running through his head, says while looking down at Jesse's body, holding back the tears, "Okay, I can do that." And Lalo lowers his gun, switching back to that happy-go-lucky Lalo, saying, "Cheer up, Walter. Before you know it, you'll have so much money that you'll forget all about this junkie partner of yours." And Lalo walks back to his car, and before driving away, he just says, "We'll be in touch." After Jesse hypes himself up with another bump of meth, he gets out the car and begins walking towards the two gangbangers responsible for Tomas's murder. And with his heart pounding and his mind racing, Jesse pulls the gun out of his pocket and slowly takes aim. And at the same time, the two gangsters see Jesse and grab their weapons as well. And in the original, all the way up until Walter gets there, it looks like Jesse is willing to die for his cause, because right here, you can see that they both have their guns drawn and ready to fire on Jesse before this happens. But without Walter there to intervene, Jesse would be shot dead before he can even get a shot off, and the two gangsters would casually drive off, leaving Jesse dead in the street. And maybe less than 5 minutes later, Walter would arrive only to find Jesse lying dead in the middle of the street, and Walter would give a pained expression before walking towards Jesse. And while standing over him, he looks down at his now former partner with the guilt eating away at him, barely able to utter the words, I'm sorry, Jesse. Walter, in this line of business, people die all the time. I give you my word, I will not go after you and your family. But that does not extend to Jesse. He's in the game. You're not. So when you unlock me, just turn around and go home. And you'll never see me again. I promise. And once Crazy 8 is free, Walter would offer to drop him off somewhere. But he declined and again telling him, just go home, Walter. And with that interaction, the two part ways. And Walter heads home and comes clean to Skylar about his cancer. But everything else that he's been through, he would take with him to the grave. And the next day, Walter turns on the news and finds a developing story about a drive-by shooting that resulted in the death of a man named Jesse Pinkman. And Walter would turn off the TV before Skylar comes in the living room while she's talking on the phone to doctor's offices trying to book an appointment. Walter, while rocking and feeding Holly, would get a call from Saul telling him that he needs to meet him at his office as soon as possible because they found Jesse. And Walter says before hanging up, I'll be right there. And as he gets ready to leave the house, he catches a breaking story on the news of a concerned parent looking for a missing child, and that person is none other than Jane's dad, Donald, looking for Jane, even offering a cash reward for any information leading to her whereabouts. And while Walter heads over to Saul's office, he thinks to himself, how is Jane missing but Saul found Jesse? It doesn't make sense. Did they break up? Is she okay? Is he okay? So many questions that he can't wait to get the answer to. And once he makes it to Saul's office, he'd be introduced to Mike. Walter, Mike, Walter. Saul says being the friendliest guy in the room, but Walter says skipping the introductions. You said you found Jesse. Well, where is he? He says while looking around. And Saul and Mike look at each other before showing Walter Jesse's duffel bag of money, and Mike would tell him straight up, well, Walter, your former partner was found dead alongside his girlfriend in a rundown motel called the Crystal Palace. I confiscated the money so no questions would be asked, and we wanted you to hear the news first before it got called in. Mike says explaining the situation, and Walter stands in shock after hearing the news, unable to take his eyes off the duffel bag as he calls back to when he first gave Jesse the money nearly a week ago. We pick up a few days later inside Jesse's prison cell, and during the late hours of the night, although in protective custody, sometimes cameras don't work like they're supposed to. And this night, the wing that Jesse's held in is having major systems issues, which creates a kind of blind spot in the area. And while Jesse's sleeping, his cell door opens and he quickly awakens to a prison guard standing in the entrance. And Jesse says, hey yo, what's going on? But the guard remains silent as two inmates walk into the cell holding shanks, both with swastika tattoos on their necks. And Jesse sits up in his bed with his back against the wall as he yells out for help. But sadly, nobody's coming to his rescue. And as the inmates approach Jesse, the guard watches on as he stabs repeatedly, turning his screams for help into blood-curdling gasps for air. And by the time that they're done, Jesse will be completely unrecognizable, covered head to toe in stab wounds. Back at the compound, Walter and Todd are halfway finished with a batch, and while they wait for it to cool, Todd and Jack are having a private conversation in the clubhouse away from Walter, who at this time is in deep thought while staring at a familiar painting, and he's come to accept the $80 million price tag for Hank's life, figuring that if he really wanted to, he can reach out to Lydia and get it back in a few months. But his main concern is the change of heart that he has for Jesse. And even after him going to Hank and trying to set him up, Walter still has love for his surrogate son. But interrupting his train of thought would be the door opening, and as Kenny, Roscoe, and Jesse, who's now in handcuffs, enters the room, after getting the camera set up, Walter and the rest of the gang sit and watch Jesse's confession. And while listening, not only is Walter implicated in the confession, but also Todd, which really gets Jack upset hearing his nephew getting ratted on. And he says, hey Kenny, you sure this was everything? Yeah, Jack, and he was right, this was definitely an off-the-books assignment. Kenny says, referring to Walter, and Jack responds saying, yeah, and how you figure? Because if they had this kind of stuff on tape and didn't have the cavalry out in the desert, they must have been counting on his arrest to get this tape of theirs to stick. Kenny explains, and Jack, while smoking a cigarette and taking in all this information, begins to boil with anger, and he looks up at Walter and tells him once again, you said he wasn't a rat, leaving Walter speechless because he really didn't think that Jesse would have went this far. But as Jack now turns his attention at Jesse, he looks at him with disgust for being a rat, and in a fit of rage, Jack pulls out his gun and he point blank shoots Jesse in the face, having the shot echo throughout the room and leaving Walter practically hypnotized with his ears ringing as he watches the blood leave Jesse's body. But Jack snaps his fingers, bringing him out of his trance, saying, hey, yo, Walter, you ready to finish the cook? During the late hours of the night, a prison bus is on its way over to a maximum security prison, and on the bus along with the other convicts would be a defeated Jesse Pinkman. and as he looks around to see the various faces on the bus, he can't help but have a bad feeling about what's going on. And suddenly, the person behind him would wrap their chains around his neck and begin to strangle him. And as he struggles to fight back and scream out for help, nobody on the bus comes to his rescue, not even the guards. They would all just bear witness to Jesse Pinkman being strangled to death before he ever makes it to a prison cell. And in the middle of the night, while looking at his pool, Walter receives a phone call from Jack telling him that the job's been done. And Walter says before ending the call, the first cook will begin tomorrow. And as Walter tries to de-escalate the situation, Tuco shuts him up by aiming a rifle at him while he continues to beat Jesse until he finds himself on his hands and knees right in front of a nearby ditch, begging for his life. And while Tuco holds the rifle to the back of his head, he would call Walter over to his side while he pulls out a pistol from his waistline. And while pointing the pistol at Walter's head, he would hand him the rifle that's still pointed at Jesse. And Tuco gives Walter an order saying, "Okay, Heisenberg, now shoot him." "Tuco, please, no, I can't, please." Walter says trying to refuse the rifle, but Tuco forces it in his hands, and while standing right behind Walter with the gun to his head, he tells him, "Either you're gonna shoot him, or I'm gonna shoot you, then I'm gonna shoot him. Now do it!" And even with the gun to the back of his head, he finds it hard to pull the trigger on his former student, especially hearing Jesse from the ground crying that he doesn't want to die. And after a few seconds pass, and Walter still hasn't pulled the trigger, Tuco gives him a little motivation by starting a countdown. 5, 4, and Walter's hands begin to sweat as he feels the cold steel against his scalp pressing harder and harder with each number. 3, 2, Tuco says, pulling the hammer back on the gun, and Jesse would tightly close his eyes as the tears fall into the sand, and he yells, "Mr. White, just do it!" And before Tuco gets to 1, Walter says with watery eyes, "I'm sorry, Jesse." And he fires a single shot to the back of Jesse's head, killing him instantly. And as his body slumps over halfway into the ditch, Tuco would take the gun away from Walter, who right now is on the verge of breaking down, having just committed cold-blooded murder of his own partner. But Tuco snaps him out of it when he kicks Jesse's body all the way into the ditch before telling him, "Come inside, Heisenberg. Don't want you going belly up on me no time soon." The thought of her no longer living under her father's thumb is definitely the driving force behind those feelings. So as they talk about flushing the drugs and leaving tonight, when they see the remaining heroin, Jane comes up with the sinister idea to take Jesse out of the picture and still keep the money in the process. Because if we're being honest here, Jane is the one who really wants to get away, and she knows that Jesse still has a soft spot for Walter and he can likely have a change of heart about leaving. So to prevent that from happening, Jane would purposely give Jesse a lethal dose of heroin, and once he nods off, she would also roll him on his back. And similar to Walter, Jane watches Jesse choke on his own vomit until he takes his last breath. But Jane would show no emotion to Jesse dying. Instead, after she checks his pulse, Jane would pack her bags, including Jesse's money, and get ready to leave for good. He then takes a few deep breaths while grabbing the gun from underneath the seat and causing his adrenaline to spike, because he knows that once he opens the car door, there's no turning back. A decision he made for himself the moment he left the house. So as he gets out the car to begin walking towards the two men, each step would have his heart beating faster and faster, but it doesn't stop his pace. And as he puts his hand in his jacket pocket to grip the gun, all the drugs that he's taken would begin to catch up with him when his vision starts to go in and out of focus. But he would just brush it off as anxiety as he continues to walk. But the two rival gang members can tell something's going on with the man approaching them, and they wouldn't even try to hide that they're going for their weapons. And after Jesse pulls out his pistol and tries to take aim, he wouldn't even be able to pull the trigger once as the two men shoot and kill Jesse in the middle of the street. And similar to the boy killing combo, the gangbangers calmly get into their car and drives away. And in Jesse's final moments, he would just look up to the stars while he bleeds out in the asphalt until everything goes dark. But just off in the distance, sitting in a black SUV would be Victor, looking through a pair of binoculars at the whole thing. And he picks up a GPS tracker off his lap before driving away as well, and showing that Gus has always had his eye on Jesse. And now he can officially control the market.